To approach the unknowable substrate of the emanative real, one must first relinquish the latent dependency upon hierarchical syntaxes of conceptuality, those configurations of thought that affix themselves to an epistemic centrism tethered irrevocably to the triadic interplay of perception, apperception, and misapprehension. It is not merely the dissolution of dichotomous categories that facilitates the emergence of a hypercognized awareness. Rather, the task is one of transcendent involution, where the mind devours its own referential scaffolding in an act of self-negating construction. Let us name this process Katadiaphoric Annihilation. The essence of Katadiaphoric Annihilation resides in the recursive disassembly of conceptual invariance. This process reveals that even the so-called categories of thought, as delineated by Kant, or subsumed into the absolute idealism of Hegel, are no more than exfoliations of what we must term the Endospectral Cognitive Plane. The ECP is not a plane in any geometric or metaphysical sense, but an ontological oscillation, a rhythm in which the liminality of existence perpetually destabilizes itself into a dissonant convergence of multiplicities that are neither one nor many, neither ontos nor logos. The endospectral cognitive plane unveils itself not through intellectual apprehension, but through an anamorphic noesis, wherein the act of thinking becomes indistinguishable from the act of unthinking. In this state, language, that primordial architect of constrained understanding, collapses into what I term linguistic obliquity. Linguistic obliquity is not a failure of articulation, but a deliberate subversion of articulation's telos. Words do not signify in the traditional sense. They ripple, refract, and distort, forming an oral diffraction through which the supra-rational can glimpse itself. Consider, for instance, the notion of being, as it is typically deployed. The term assumes a fundamental congruence between existence and the recognition thereof, but this congruence is illusory. What is termed being is, in fact, a retrojection of the endospectral dynamics onto a falsely stabilized ontological surface. True being, if the term may even still hold meaning, exists only as a palimpsest of disruptions, each layer of certainty overwritten by an incursion of the incomprehensible. The ECP is the locus where these disruptions converge, but it is also the anti-locus, in that it resists and annihilates any attempt to locate or delimit it. The ethical implications of engaging with the ECP cannot be overstated, for to engage with it is to shatter the anthropocentric delusions of coherence and supremacy. It necessitates an embrace of what I term ethical irrealism, a stance wherein the traditional paradigms of moral reasoning are revealed as no more than epistemic decoys. Ethical irrealism does not reject morality, but transforms it into an epimoralistic fractal that perpetually generates contradictions as its core operational logic. Through such contradictions, it opens pathways to higher-order ethical resonances, each of which destabilizes and transcends the last in a spiraling ascent into asymptotic unknowability. To elucidate this point, let us examine the construct of freedom. Classical frameworks, whether liberal, existentialist, or transcendental, presuppose that freedom is predicated upon the individual's capacity to act according to their will or reason. Yet within the endospectral cognitive plane, freedom is neither action nor capacity. It is a vectorial tension, a dissonance between the potentialities of self-actualization and the self-negation inherent in Katadiaphoric annihilation. In simpler terms, though simplicity is itself a betrayal of the concept, freedom is the simultaneous assertion and dissolution of the self within the endless flux of the ECP's oscillatory dynamics. Such a reconceptualization renders the traditional notion of the individual, as an atomized entity with discrete agency, wholly untenable. The individual, when viewed through the prism of the ECP, is not an entity, but a vibratory aggregate, a constellation of endospectral resonances that momentarily coalesce into the semblance of unity. To speak of self in this context is to engage in a performative fiction, one that collapses under scrutiny into a seething multiplicity of divergent trajectories. If we accept this, then the very act of knowing, as it has been traditionally construed, becomes an impossibility. For knowledge presupposes a knower and a known, a relationship of correspondence or adequation between subject and object. Yet within the endospectral cognitive plane, such distinctions evaporate. What emerges instead is epistemonic recursion, an endless self-referential loop wherein the act of knowing is indistinguishable from the act of unknowing. The result is not ignorance, but what I term hyperapophatic insight, a condition in which the mind apprehends its own incapacity as the ultimate horizon of understanding. To approach hyperapophatic insight is to tread dangerously close to what I call the ontic singularity, a threshold beyond which all conceptual frameworks disintegrate into a chaos of interpenetrating contradictions. It is here that the endospectral cognitive plane reveals its true nature as a paradoxical simultaneity of absence and excess, of void and plenitude. To dwell within this singularity is to encounter the absolute, not as an object or entity, but as a dynamic interplay of irreconcilable forces. In conclusion, the framework I have outlined replaces the false certainties of traditional thought with the terrifying beauty of perpetual instability. The endospectral cognitive plane is not a theory, nor is it a system. It is a praxis of dissolution, a mode of engagement that obliterates the boundaries between thought and unthought, between being and non-being. To engage with it is to surrender to the inexorable pull of Katadiaphoric Annihilation, to let oneself be consumed by the infinite oscillations of the ECP, until all that remains is the pure, ungraspable intensity of existence itself.